"Say it again," she whispered. And that was the moment I knew the dare had broken her, not me. "My name is Cole Maddox. I was a cowboy, a ranch hand, the man who rode her fence lines before sunrise, and mended what the Texas wind tore apart after sundown. She was Margaret Hale, my female boss, the most powerful woman in the county, a widow who had taken a dying ranch and turned it into something men twice her size envied and feared. She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for anything. But she asked for that. She had dared me chin high, eyes hard, voice steady as a rifle, to stand on that porch and say I didn't love her. She said it like a challenge, like she already knew how it would end. Like every man before me had tucked his hat and walked away the moment she drew that line. But I wasn't lying. And somewhere beneath all that pride, beneath those walls she had spent 3 years building stone by stone, she knew it too. So what happens when a guarded woman dares the one man she cannot intimidate to confess what she already feels in her own chest? What does a female boss do when the cowboy she controls is the only one she cannot make walk away? And why, after everything, did she whisper those 3 words that changed everything between us? Say it again. Stay with me. Because what happened next on that West Texas porch, neither of us ever saw coming. I had been working the Hale Ranch for 2 years when I first understood what Margaret really was beneath all that authority. Not the boss, not the widow everyone pitied behind her back and feared to her face. She was something rarer than either of those things. She was a woman who had decided, quietly and permanently, that needing someone was a luxury she could no longer afford. I noticed it the morning a fence post snapped clean during a storm, and 3 of my fellow ranch hands stood around debating who should tell her. None of them wanted to. I walked up to the house myself, knocked twice, and delivered the news straight. She looked at me the way you look at something that surprises you by being exactly what it claimed to be. Then she nodded, pulled on her riding gloves, and said, "Fix it before noon." That was it. No panic, no performance. Just the expectation that things would be handled because she had hired men to handle them. I fixed it before 10. After that, she started giving me assignments the other hands never got. Riding with her to negotiate cattle prices with men who thought a woman at the table was an insult. Standing beside her when lawyers from Austin came sniffing around the south boundary of her land with paperwork that smelled like somebody else's plan. She never explained why she chose me for those moments. But I understood. She needed someone who wouldn't flinch, someone whose eyes wouldn't go sideways the moment the room got uncomfortable. I never flinched. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't afford to tell her, was that the reason I never flinched had nothing to do with courage. It had everything to do with her. Every morning I saddled my horse before the sun cleared the hill. I told myself what I had been telling myself since the 2nd month on that ranch. She is your boss, Cole. She signs your name at the end of the month. You ride her land. You fix her fences. You go home to the bunkhouse, and you keep your feelings exactly where they belong, buried under the work. But feelings buried under work don't die. They just wait, patient as the Texas heat. And then came the evening that changed everything between us. It started with something small, the way things that change your life almost always do. A mare had gone lame near the east pasture. I had stayed late to tend to her, and when I finally walked back toward the bunkhouse, I saw the lamp still burning on the porch of the main house. Margaret was sitting alone in the wooden chair she kept near the railing, a ledger open across her knees. The night air smelled of dry grass and distant rain. She didn't look up when I passed. But she spoke. "Cole," she said. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost careful. "Do you think a person can run something, truly run it, without ever letting it run them?" I stopped walking. I turned and looked at her. The lamplight made her face look younger somehow, less like a boss, more like a woman carrying something heavier than ledger books. I thought about it honestly before I answered, because she deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort. "No, ma'am," I said. "I don't think that's how it works." She looked up then. Her eyes met mine, and for one unguarded second, something moved across her face that I had never seen there before. Not strength, not command. Something much harder to carry than either of those. Loneliness. She closed the ledger. She looked back out into the dark. "Good night, Cole," she said. I walked to the bunkhouse. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling for a long time. And I knew, with the kind of certainty a man feels in his chest before his mind catches up, that something between us had just shifted. Quiet as a door opening in a room you thought was locked. What I didn't know was that she had felt it too, and that it had terrified her. 3 days passed after that porch conversation. 3 days where Margaret Hale went back to being exactly who she always was: composed, direct, impossible to read. She gave orders at breakfast. She reviewed the cattle ledger after supper. She rode the north pasture Tuesday morning, like nothing had shifted between us. But I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way she paused half a second too long when I entered a room. The way she found reasons to disagree with me in front of the other hands, small corrections, unnecessary ones, like she was trying to rebuild a wall she could feel crumbling. I let her. I kept my head down, did my work, and told myself that night on the porch had meant nothing beyond two tired people talking in the dark. I almost believed it. Then came the afternoon Harlan Briggs rode onto the property. Harlan was a cattle broker from San Antonio with soft hands, expensive boots, and the particular smile of a man who had never once been told no by a woman, and found the idea amusing. He had been circling the Hale ranch for months, sending letters Margaret never answered, making offers she never entertained. But that afternoon, he came in person. And he didn't come alone. He brought 2 associates and a county land assessor. I was at the water trough when they rode in. I watched Margaret step off the porch and walk toward them with the kind of stillness that meant she was furious, but had decided fury was a luxury she couldn't spend right now. Harlan climbed down from his horse and smiled like he was doing her a favor just by arriving. "Miss Hale," he said. "Or is it still Mrs.? Hard to keep track when a woman's been alone this long." The 2 associates chuckled. The assessor looked at his boots. I set down what I was holding. Margaret didn't blink. She said, "State your business, Harlan. I have work to finish." He pulled an envelope from his coat, laid out a number. A purchase offer for the South 40 acres, the most fertile land on the property. The land her late husband had broken his back clearing. The land that made the difference between a working ranch and a struggling one. He said it casually, like he was discussing weather, like the number was a kindness she should be grateful for. She took the envelope. She looked at it. Then she handed it back. "When you have a serious offer," she said, "send a letter like a serious man." Harlan's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. They slid sideways and landed on me. He studied me the way men study something they're trying to categorize. "That your foreman?" he asked. "Ranch hand," Margaret said. Her voice was flat. Harlan nodded slowly. "Must be lonely," he said. "Woman out here running all this alone. No partner, no family, just hired help and open land." He paused, deliberately. A man starts to wonder what exactly keeps her warm at night. The air went still. Every hand in the yard heard it. I felt it land on Margaret like a stone. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. But I saw her jaw tighten, that small, almost invisible thing she did when something cut through the armor she wore so well. I stepped forward before I had decided to. I said, "Mr. Briggs, you've delivered your offer. She's given you her answer. I'd ride out now if I were you." Harlan looked at me with something between amusement and contempt. "Ranch hands giving advice now," he said. "That how things work out here?" "That's how things work on this property," I said. My voice was quiet. I made sure it stayed that way. Something in my stillness reached him. He looked at me a moment longer than was comfortable for either of us. Then he pocketed the envelope, climbed back on his horse, and rode out without another word. His associates followed. The assessor practically ran to his wagon. The yard went back to its sounds: horses, wind, the creak of the water pump. I turned back toward the trough. "Cole!" Her voice stopped me. I turned around. Margaret was standing exactly where she had been, but something in her posture had changed. The iron was still there, but beneath it something softer, something she was working hard not to show. She didn't say thank you. Margaret Hale did not say thank you easily. Instead, she said, "Come to the house after supper. We need to go over the south boundary contracts." I nodded. I went back to work. But my hands were not quite steady for the rest of that afternoon. And it had nothing to do with Harlan Briggs. Supper came and went. The other hands drifted to the bunkhouse. The Texas sky turned the color of an old wound, deep red, fading into purple, fading into dark. I walked to the main house and knocked. She called me in. The table was clear except for a lantern and 2 sets of papers. She sat across from me, and we went through the contracts line by line. She explained the boundary markers. I asked the right questions. The work was real. The reason for it felt like something else entirely. An hour passed. Then 2. At some point, the contracts stopped being the reason either of us was still at that table. She asked me something that had nothing to do with land. She asked if I had ever left a place I cared about because staying felt too dangerous. I looked at her across the lantern light. "Yes," I said. "Once." She nodded like that answered something she'd been turning over in her mind for days. Then she was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind you don't fill unless you're willing to go somewhere you can't come back from. Then she set her pen down. She folded her hands on the table, and she looked at me with those eyes that gave nothing away except that tonight, for the first time, they were giving everything away. "Cole," she said. Her voice was careful, almost clinical, like she was about to conduct an assessment rather than say something that had clearly been fighting its way out of her for weeks. "Is there something you want to say to me?" The lantern flickered between us. I knew what she was really asking, and she knew that I knew. That was the thing about Margaret Hale. She was always 12 steps ahead of the conversation, always in control of which direction it went. This was her way of opening a door without admitting she had unlocked it. I thought about the bunkhouse ceiling I had stared at 3 nights ago. I thought about 2 years of early mornings and difficult rooms and feelings buried under work that refused to stay buried. Then I told her the truth. I said, "Yes, there is." She didn't look away, but something shifted behind her eyes, something that looked almost like fear in a woman I had never once seen, afraid. She straightened in her chair. The armor came back up fast, practiced, instinctive. "Then say what you need to say," she told me, "and then we'll both know where we stand." I took a breath, and she did something I did not expect. Before I could speak, she leaned forward slightly, just barely, and said, "Or don't. Say you don't feel a thing, Cole. Look me straight and say it. I dare you." The lantern light caught the edge of her jaw. The Texas wind pressed against the windows. The house was completely silent. She was daring me, the way she dared every man who got too close, expecting me to fold, expecting me to protect us both by lying. But I wasn't lying. I looked at her across that table, across 2 years of fence lines and early mornings and lantern-lit evenings and every unspoken thing we had ever carried in the same room together, and I said it. "Margaret, I love you. I have loved you for a long time, and I am not going to say otherwise just because it would be easier for both of us if I did." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. She sat completely still. The pen lay forgotten beside her hand. The lantern between us burned steady and warm. Outside, a night bird called once and went quiet. She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face, something raw and unguarded, and entirely unlike any expression I had ever seen on Margaret Hale in 2 years of working beside her. And then, barely above a whisper, she said it. "Say it again." I said it again. Not louder, not softer. The same way a man states something he has carried so long, it has become as natural as breathing. "Margaret, I love you." She closed her eyes. Just for a moment. The way a person closes their eyes when something they stopped believing in suddenly turns out to be real. When she opened them, the woman sitting across that table was not the boss who commanded rooms and silenced men twice her size. She was simply Margaret. A woman who had been alone in a house too big for one person, running a ranch too demanding for one pair of hands, carrying a grief too heavy for one heart for 3 years too long. She stood up slowly, walked around the table, stopped in front of me. I stood too. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not look like a woman bracing for impact. She looked like a woman who had finally decided to put something heavy down. "I have been afraid," she said quietly. "Not of you. Of this. Of wanting something again and losing it." "I understand that," I said. Her eyes searched mine. "Do you?" "I lost things too," I told her. "I just stopped letting the losing decide what came next." Something in that reached her. I watched it move through her, the way wind moves through tall grass, slow, then all at once. Her hand came up and rested against my chest, right over the place where 2 years of buried feelings had been waiting, with more patience than I deserved credit for. I covered her hand with mine. The lantern burned between the shadows. The Texas night pressed warm against the windows. And Margaret Hale, the most guarded woman in the county, leaned her forehead against my shoulder and breathed out the longest breath I had ever heard a person carry. We stood like that for a long time, neither of us needing to fill it. The weeks that followed changed the shape of everything. Not dramatically, not the way storms change things, the way seasons do. Gradual, certain, permanent. She still ran the ranch with the same precision and authority that had made men twice her size step aside. But she stopped running it alone. I rode beside her now, not behind her. She reviewed contracts at the table while I sat across from her, and sometimes she looked up and caught me watching her, and instead of looking away, she smiled. Small, private, entirely hers. The other hands noticed. Nobody said a word about it, not because they were afraid of me, because they respected her, and because whatever was growing between us was plainly, obviously, something real. 6 months after that night, she asked me something while we were riding the north pasture at sunrise. The sky was the color of fresh fire, the grass still silver with morning dew, and her horse moved easy beside mine the way it always did, now close, unhurried, comfortable in the nearness. She said, "Cole, do you think a person can run something and let it run them at the same time?" I looked at her. She was already smiling because she already knew what I was going to say. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I think that's exactly how it works." She laughed. It was the most beautiful sound the Texas morning had ever held. That fall, in front of nobody but the land and the sky and the 2 ranch hands who served as witnesses, Margaret Hale became Margaret Maddox. No grand ceremony, no borrowed lace. Just her hand in mine on the porch where she had first dared me to lie and couldn't hide her relief when I refused. I kissed her in the same spot where she had whispered those 3 words that broke every wall she had ever built. "Say it again." And standing there, with the West Texas wind carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain, her fingers laced through mine, and her eyes finally at peace, I understood what love in this country really looked like. Not flowers, not fanfare, not easy words spoken in comfortable rooms. It looked like 2 stubborn people choosing each other anyway. Choosing to stay when leaving was simpler. Choosing truth when a lie would have protected them both. She never needed saving. She needed someone who wouldn't flinch. And I never needed much. Just a place worth staying. We found both in each other.